Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to do a presentation on year-end closing. Again, I am, hold on, let's see if this is moving. There we go. I'm Devin from Software Solutions Group. If you haven't met me before, I've worked for Software Solutions Group for 10 years. My background beforehand was in accounting and small business, so I've just done a few year-end closes here at Software Solutions Group. What we wanted to do is sort of go through points that are important for year-end close, how to create a new fiscal year, the various module year-end closes. Notice there are different sizes because they're different importances, and we'll talk about why. We're going to talk about the biggie, the financial year-end close, and then we're going to wrap up by talking about payables, 1099s, and some things to pay attention for printing. So that's sort of our agenda for today. We're really going to hit on all the modules, even though not everyone has payroll and fixed assets. It's going to be kind of brief, but I think it'll be enough to give everyone details of some of the details, because I know there's a lot of questions about year-end close, and it's an important thing to do right. All right, so let's get started. First piece is let's talk about fiscal years versus calendar years. I know a lot of people, their fiscal year is calendar, and in that place the system is pretty straightforward. But if your fiscal year is not calendar, it's important to know that you're still going to have to do some calendar closes. Sales, purchasing, both have both a fiscal close and a calendar close, so you're going to need to close both of those. Payroll works on a calendar only. And then fixed assets and financial works fiscal only. Tax and inventory, really, as we get into those, you'll see why it really doesn't matter. It's up to you to decide whether you want those numbers to be fiscal or calendar. So any questions on that for those of you who do not have a calendar fiscal year? All right, don't hear anyone, so I'm going to move on. So let's talk about creating a fiscal year. If you want this PowerPoint, I'll send it over later. So I did detail the steps, but I'm actually going to show it to you. So here I am in Microsoft Dynamics GP 2015. If you have a different version, it might look slightly different. If I go, so there's two different ways. I can go Microsoft Dynamics GP, Tools, Setup, Company, Fiscal Periods, or the same thing under Administration down in the Setup, Company, Fiscal Periods. So this is the piece that confuses people. I wish that they'd add a new button here, but they haven't. So I'm in a Fabricam, and the last year that I have set up is 2019. So the year I'm going to be creating is 2020. So what you actually do is you go into this drop-down and type the next year. As soon as I type that year and press Tab, it populates with hopefully the correct first day, last day. It's getting this from the last year you've set up. If this is correct, you keep moving and you press Calculate up here. At that point, it's going to fill in the periods down here. Give it a second. And it fills in period 1 through 12, because I said there was 12 periods, and uses first of the month. If your periods are different, at this point you'd want to change your dates. At this point, I have created a new fiscal year. I can hit OK, which will close the screen, but it is created. That typing into the drop-down is very confusing for people who haven't done it before, but really that's the steps to it. You need to have the year created before you can do any transactions. So any questions on that? Beautiful. All right. So here's our next question. When we're talking about closes, before you've closed, can you do transactions in the next year? And the answer is yes, as long as you created the year in the fiscal period screen, which we just showed you. So you can do transactions in 2016 before you've closed 2015. Notice I have a little exception. Payroll and fixed assets is a little different, which we'll talk about when we get there. But for the rest of the place, that's the count. You can always do transactions in the next year. And when you do your closes, will any history be deleted? And the answer to that is no. Caveat, as long as the maintain history checkboxes are selected. So these are located and they're at a different level. So for general ledger, bank reconciliation, payroll, they're at a module level. And then for vendors, customers, items, and tax details, they're actually on each vendor card. And so quickly, I'm going to show you that in a vendor. So I'm going to go to purchasing. I'm going to go to vendor card. I'll pull up a vendor here. And I'm going to go to options. And here are your check boxes. You want to check this. You can easily add a SmartList for this. Here it is. I made one in vendors. I called it Keep History, and these are all these Keep History. And if I sort this, I can see that I've got a couple vendors here that I do not set up to keep history. That's kind of a problem. If you've got a lot of vendors, we actually have scripts to check this for you. And so, again, each customer, vendor, item, and tax detail has the Keep History setting. Very important to pay attention to. All right. Overall, before you do any year-end close or routine, what should you do? You should always get all users out of GP and all related programs. You should back up the database, and if you're going to archive this, which is strongly recommended, back up your Dynamics database too, so both your company database and your Dynamics database. We talk about archiving these backups. I can't tell you how many times we have helped customers or fixed a problem because they had a year-end backup tucked aside, and maybe sometime in February or March or even as late as September or October, something happened, there was an issue, and we needed to be able to get data from a good backup from some point in the history. We use them all the time. Can't stress that enough. Tuck aside at least once a year a nice backup. Back up your database and archive it. Run your close-in routine. Only let users back in if the process was successful. Some of these processes error. That's the other reason for that backup. If your users are out, it runs into a problem, you can always restore the backup. Call us later, and we can figure out what the problem was or try it again in a test company. So again, steps are get everybody out, back up your database, run your routine, check it. And this really goes for any year-end close, any routine, any utility. These are really the steps you want to do. So I'm not going to bore you by repeating these at every step. Remember that these are really critical to do. Any questions on that?
Hey, Devin, could you make this expand the screen so it takes up the whole computer screen?
It pretty much is taking up the whole computer screen.
I can't hold fire.
Not on ours. Is there any way for you to just put that box up next to the X on top? To the right?
To the right. To expand the whole screen just a little bit over.
A little bit more over.
Is it large enough for you guys to see it?
Well, it just would be, when you get to the GP screens, they're a little tiny. But if you could hit that little box next to the X, that should expand it to screen.
It is full screen on my side, so yeah. All right. Oops, sorry, went too far. All right, so next step. Housekeeping. During the close process, it's a great time to do some GP routines. So there are two GP routines that move things to history. One is called paid transaction removal. That's in Receivables. Again, misnamed. It doesn't remove them. It moves them to history, again, as long as we've checked those boxes to keep history. And the other one is remove completed purchase orders. Same thing. It moves them to history. One thing, very important, that these can have data issues and these routines will crash. We do have scripts to check for common data issues beforehand, but if you're going to do these routines, which are recommended, you, again, can't stress it again, make that backup. But if you want to call us ahead of time, we can help you run the scripts and see for some issues. One thing to talk about, there is a routine called, under financial, called period consolidation routine. The period consolidation routine combines journal entries within a period for the same account. Sounds like a great idea if you've got hundreds or thousands of transactions hitting a certain GL account. The reason we discourage it is it actually makes unbalanced journal entries. And so if perchance some point in the dusty future you actually get an unbalanced journal entry, it makes it very, very hard for us to figure out which were the ones that were unbalanced via the period consolidation routine and which were the ones that were that's unbalanced due to a data issue. Memory's cheap. We strongly discourage using the period consolidation routine. Just it's easier. Yes. Any questions on that? Okay. So housekeeping. Should you run GP utilities for checklinks or reconciles? So there's sort of been a change of feeling with Microsoft. Back 15, 20 years ago, Microsoft recommended running checklinks and reconciles all the time. They really sort of backed up on that. They now, party line is to only run checklinks or reconciles if you have a specific data issue, and really only run the ones related to your issue. And they say to try it in a test company first. We recommend to check your data very carefully after running these utilities. We have seen many occurrences where these utilities change financial data and permanently remove records, and not all the changes are listed on the reports. So checklinks and reconciles are a great tool when necessary, but not something that you want to routinely do as part of a year-end close, for example. Okay? Any questions on that? Was that a question? Okay. All right, so let's talk about the actual module closes. We're going to talk about receivables, payables, and tax, or AR, AP, and tax. What do these closes do? They reset various year-to-date fields to 0 and move the year-to-date number to the prior year-to-date fields. These fields are seen on SmartList, inquiries, and summary reports. And we have a lot of customers who have actually never run these closes. They didn't know, they didn't do it. It really doesn't change the system. It still works. Let me show you real quick where we see those. So I'm going to go to a SmartList here. And I am going to go to year-to-date life. So here on this SmartList, this is vendors. There's these amount billed life, amount billed last year, amount year-to-date. These are the fields we're talking about. And so if I actually go to the yearly summary inquiry, and when it's saying amount since last closed, again, these are the fields we're talking about. There is another place where it keeps history. So if I change this to fiscal year, and I have this calculate button, and this calculate button is sort of the key. If I hit this calculate button, it's actually calculating it off period numbers that are accurate and correct. And so when I'm looking at this screen, having the fiscal year and the calculate, this is accurate number. If I'm looking here at the amount since close, these are these buckets that are refreshed when you do the year-end close. And so literally it takes what's in the year-to-date number, it dumps it in the last year bucket, and it takes year-to-date and turns it to 0. There's no perfect ideal time to run these closes because, as we know, one of the beauties of Microsoft Dynamics GP is that you can finish up December while you're starting January. This close really sort of defeats that purpose in some ways. So what do people do? Option number one is you do it at the best possible time for your company, knowing that these numbers aren't going to be exactly perfect. And if you need perfect numbers, you don't use the numbers on the SmartList in that inquiry screen unless you're hitting the calculate button. And so most people do it somewhere between, December 30th and January 2nd as makes sense to them. If you want those numbers to be perfect, we actually have scripts from Microsoft to reset them after the fact and calculate them from the real transactions. So it's really sort of, are you going to use them regularly? If so, and you want them to be perfect, we're going to have to do a second process. Any questions on that? All right, and so here's the payables year-to-date screen. you notice it's got a fiscal calendar and all, and it has when it was last closed. Receivables, and again, it's under purchasing routines, year-end close. Same here with receivables. Under routines, where have I moved routines? Oh, it's down further. Here's year-end close. You can see it looks very identical. And then in the PowerPoint, I have where the tax one, it's under administration company. And so we'll look at that one. So if I go to administration, and again, I go to routines. Oh, see, got to follow my own path. Administration routines company. Administration, there it is, right in front of me. Company, tax year-end close. All right. Now, the tax year-end close is a little bit confusing because some of the Microsoft instructions say that it removes details. It doesn't as long as that keep history box is checked. So any questions on these module closes? All right. So what about your 1099s? Your payable 1099s are independent of any of the GP closes. You can run your 1099s before you close, after you close, or whenever. And we're going to talk about how to run them. This is a little confusing because if you actually read the Microsoft KnowledgeBase article, it kind of acts like you have to run your 1099s beforehand. And that might have been the case, say 15 years ago, but it's not the case now. Those are stored in completely independent tables. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so let's talk about the inventory module, year-end close. This works very similar. It's the same year-to-date type buckets. I just wanted to talk about this one separately because there are these checkboxes here. And these checkboxes do actually fully remove data from the tables. And so, again, I wanted to point those out. Most people don't check the boxes. Most people don't want to check the boxes. But remember, it's not just going to move it to history. It's going to completely purge it out of your data. Any questions on that? Beautiful. Okay. Moving on. Let's briefly talk about payroll because I know not everyone uses payroll, but it's important to know if you are using it. The payroll year-end closing process creates a year-end file, which is used for the printing of W-2s, W-3s, 1099-Rs, and 1096s. So this process actually can be repeated because all it's doing is making that closing file. Again, Microsoft recommends you always make a backup before running this, and the KnowledgeBase article for payroll is pretty specific, and we strongly recommend following that KnowledgeBase article. I'm going to go over the steps briefly for those who have this module and want to review them. Not going to belabor it too much. Tax tables. The tax tables are really important. The thing to keep in mind is if you're doing 1090 or let me try that again. If you're doing 2015 processing, like the year-end close, you need to have a 2015 tax table in place. If you're doing 2016 processing, like processing payroll, you need to have a 2016 tax table in place. New York State tax rates haven't changed, but federal is changing for January for 2016, so you're going to have to toggle the two different tax rates. And so this is sort of what it looks like. You finish your payroll in 2015, you do your closing, make sure you did that backup, you check the numbers, you get your W-2s all set, then you can put your 2016 tax tables in and run your payroll. If your W-2s aren't finished in the time that you need to do your 2016 payroll, it kind of looks like this. Your payroll, you do your 2016 tables, do what you need to do for payroll, then put your 2015 tax tables back on to start working on your W-2s, and repeat as needed. So you can take time to get your W-2s all perfect. You're just going to have to take the tax files in and out. Any questions on that? Perfect. All right. Fixed assets. Year-end close is run for one or more books and it is a hard close. So this is one of the places in the system that there is only a single year at a time. So per book, you've got to finish that prior year, all your transactions, your additions, your retirements, your depreciation. for the year before you close, and you can't depreciate for the next year until you have closed. And add to that, most reports cannot be run after closing. With the new version in GP 2013, they did add a report that can be run after closing, but all the rest can only be run for the current year. And so please, if you have this module, there is a KnowledgeBase article which can give links. Follow this very carefully for this module. All right. Any questions on that? So let's talk about the biggie, the financial or the GL year-end close. What does this do? It creates your beginning balances for your balance sheet accounts and your retained earnings. It deletes unused inactive accounts. And what we talk about is that it has a hard close on that prior year. Because in GP you can post to one historical year, which we'll talk about, if you're closing 2015, you really cannot make any more entries into 2014. So here's what we talk about. Can you still make entries to your year after your close? The answer is yes. If I've closed 2015 and I have this posting to history checkbox set up in GL, I can make entries to 2015. Can't make entries 1 year behind that, but I can make it to the year I've just closed. And this is true even in the subledger. So I can do payables transactions. I can do receivables transactions. I can do bank transactions if necessary. One note, when you're looking at these posting journals and your journal entries as the reports print out, it kind of looks like the transaction is hiccuping and doubling itself. This is when you're posting to history, and it is normal. Really what it's doing is posting the journal entry as of the day you're telling it to post the journal entry, and then it's posting that journal entry a second time as of the last day of the year, so December 31st if your calendar. This one's actually really going into the balance brought forward period to adjust the beginning balances. So we get a lot of support calls about that, and it's important to note that's a normal process. Any questions on that? Okay. So when do you do your financial year-end closing? Technically, any time is possible. The best time is after your subledgers are pretty much complete for the year and after the bulk of your year-end entries are made. And generally before you need to run financial statements for your new year. Some people have monkeyed around in FRX or Management Reporter to get financial statements out beforehand. Really not necessary. Run your year-end close. You can still make those prior year adjustments. So most people close somewhere in mid-February. Late January, early February is when the bulk of the closes happen. So let's talk about your important close steps. First one, check your account posting types. We get probably at least 10 support calls a year for people who closed their year. The retained earnings are wrong because one of their accounts were set up wrong. And I'm going to show you a SmartList in a few minutes on how to check that. Next thing is post all your transactions. You really shouldn't have transactions sitting around waiting to be posted when you run your year-end close. Get everyone out of GP. Make your backups and archive them. Do not end task on your close, even if it says not responding. GP likes to go not responding. That just means the server is thinking. It doesn't mean it's not responding. Some of the changes in the newer versions does make the year-end close slightly longer, and if you have added new features and new modules, your year-end close could take longer. Really important not to end task on it. And then check your close before letting people back into GP to do work. Microsoft also recommends making another backup after the close and archiving it. One of the things they talk about is they've helped people with issues by being able to compare those two if they find an issue weeks or months later. And if there are issues, such as it went not responding for an hour, and I didn't know what to do, so I did crash out of my close, restore your backup and try it again maybe the next weekend or in a test company. And one more thing to note, there is this reverse historical year, which I'll talk about. You're not supposed to use that if you have a failed close. You really need to fix the failed close. Okay? Any questions on that? I'm going to walk through a couple of these steps in a minute.
You're going to give us these slides, Devin? This is Beth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, that's why I put some of the steps in there and stuff, and the knowledge base articles. We can send the slides out.
Great.
So, posting type SmartList. So, again, let me go into my SmartList here. I'm going to make this one a little bigger for you guys. So I'm going to go into the SmartList for, I'm going to close up purchasing here. I'm going to open up financial, and I'm going to go to accounts. And I've made a favorite here. What I have added is my main account segment. Hopefully this is correct, and this is sort of your natural account. And so I've added a search criteria here with my main account segment is greater than 299, and my posting type is profit and loss. I'm pretending that 299 is my threshold between my balance sheet and my P&L, and so anything greater than 299 shouldn't probably be a profit and loss. So I hit OK. Oops. Did I have this reversed? Oh, sorry, I did have this reversed. Balance sheet, my bad. Shouldn't be equal to balance sheet. And so in that case, I come up with some balance sheet accounts that are past that threshold number. One thing to pay attention to, I left this category number on purpose for these zeros. The accounts SmartList includes both standard GL accounts, but also unit accounts and variable and fixed allocation accounts. The way you can tell what they are is they don't have categories. Their categories are zero. So this particular one is an allocation account, so it doesn't matter. There's actually no setting for it. And the same down here, these are unit accounts. There's no setting for those. I can tell because of this category of zero. And so quickly I can see, oh gosh, I've got some accounts set up here that are completely wrong. Let me go fix them to profit and loss. And then same if I do the opposite. The greater than is not equal to, so you have to sort of keep that in mind when you're setting your account. So I'm going to do less than 3,000 and it's equal to profit and loss. Again, I'm pretending that this is my threshold on my main account. And yay, I didn't get anything this time. Any questions on that? We can assist you with fixing your year-end close if you close with your posting types wrong. If you are on GP 2013 R2 or later, there's a reverse close button, which I'm going to show you in a second. It's actually right here. And we're going to start using the reverse historical year. That's actually Microsoft's recommended fix for fixing account posting types, if you are on that version. If you're not on that version, we have to do it the old way, which there are steps to fix it. Okay. So if you're on 2013 or 2013 R2, they made some changes to the year-end closing screen. The first one, which is most fabulous, is a progress bar. So you can kind of get an idea of how long it is. It seems to hang at step number 2. Many people have reported that. Step number 2 seems to take a long time. Also, what they added is the maintain inactive accounts option. So this never used to be an option. If you had an inactive account that wasn't used, it would blow away. Really important caveat, don't press close year 2 times. I can't tell you. I know of at least 6 times where people have pressed the button, didn't think it did anything, pressed it again. The progress will change, so don't panic. And for some small companies, the close is very fast. Okay. Any questions on the year-end closing screen? Beautiful. All right. So after it closes, check your close. Are there any errors during processing? Obviously a problem. Is your retained earnings entry correct? Does your trial balance total to 0? And Microsoft actually recommends running financial reports before and after the close and looking at them. And you can always close your fiscal periods afterwards. Put those check boxes on your fiscal periods to prevent people, oh, there's my fiscal period screen, to prevent people from posting to the things that you don't want to post to. Close these all up. because that's what actually prevents people from posting or not posting.
So when you run, when you're running your financial reports before and after, are you running 2015 and 2016 before and after?
If you haven't done many entries to 2016, I would run 2015 before and after.
Okay.
But you could certainly check. I would probably run 2015 and check my ending balances on my balance sheet for 2015 to my beginning balances of my 2016 balance sheet. So those, I'd check both your financial statements and. This is not something we do a ton of, but it is one of the Microsoft recommendations. And so when I was going over Microsoft to make sure we were agreeing, I'm like, that's interesting. We probably should add that. We generally just check your retained earnings entry. So it's a good question. Any other questions? All right, beautiful. So let's talk about your 1099s. Your 1099s are under routines. It's called Print 1099s. And there are two buttons on here. I'm, again, on 2013 R2 or later, which is the ribbons. But the older ones do have two buttons also. One prints your forms. One prints an edit list. The edit list is what would it print if it was going to print. Okay? There's been some significant changes to the 1099s. Biggest one is if you're in GP 2010, if at some point during the year the vendor was a 1099 vendor, it's going to accumulate numbers in the 1099 boxes, and it will print that 1099 until those numbers are cleared out. And so you actually have to turn it to a 1099 vendor to clear out the numbers and then turn it back to not a 1099 vendor to not get the 1099. They made a huge amount of changes in GP 2013, which we're going to talk about. There's some update screens for that, okay? So they added a utility to update your 1099 information for your vendor and all the transactions. They added 1099 transactions rather than editing the totals on the 1099 details. They added the 1096 cover page, and they added an address ID for your 1099s. And the prior version used the primary address on the cards. Printing your 1099s themselves, you need to purchase a form from an office supply company. You can't even print them off the IRS website. They have special toner ink on them, and so even IRS says go buy them. The form did change slightly for 2015. The change is what I highlighted down here. They added this new box, FATCA filing requirement. So everything else lines up perfectly. I printed 2014 and 15 and overlaid them, and that's the only difference. Everything else is exactly in the same place. When I ran and printed mine, so when you print them, because 1099s are set as a pre-printed form, if you go to a printer, this little general box pops up. That's where you can select your printer. The pre-printed form option has this sort of scooch your alignment option. I had to scooch my alignment over by 0.25 to make it line up to the boxes correctly. So you can just print one of these on paper and hold it up, or print one on one of your 1099s and see if you need to scooch yours. Every printer is going to differ. I didn't have to make any other changes beyond that, but I did need to check the alignment a little bit. And so again, if yours are offset more than that, feel free to call us and we can help you move the boxes around. Or if you've moved it in the past, you may need to go back to the original. So alignment's important to check on. Any questions on the 1099 form itself? Beautiful. All right, so if you're in GP 2013 or later, I wanted to talk about some of these Update 1099 information windows that are new. It's under Utilities, and so this is the update information, and you should use this rather than updating the vendor card if someone is changing from a 1099 or no longer a 1099 vendor. What this will do is you can either update your transactions or your vendor and your transactions. Most of the time you'd want to do this unless it's brand new. And you can change it from one tax type to another tax type. And it'll go through and actually change all the transactions and correct the totals really great. It was always a pain in the neck before. In addition to that, you can now edit 1099 transactions. So after the transaction has been created and entered, you can still pull it up and change the tax type or the box, remembering that the prior screen, this update, would blow away any onesie-twosie changes you've made here. So in the past, we always had to go to the 1099 details to tweak the totals. Now, in this new version, you can sort of run through and update your vendor using the utilities. Any questions on that? So one thing to touch on that I didn't mention here is a lot of people just use the edit report here to check what they want to do for their 1099s. If you have one of the newer versions of GP with SmartList Designer, or if you have SmartList Builder and you've got a lot of 1099 vendors, we can easily build you a SmartList to preview ahead of time. What are your 1099 balances? How are they set up? Just so you can check that data. But again, the utility is going to make that a lot easier. Any other questions on your 1099s or anything else? So we'll send out the slides. I've included in here all the KnowledgeBase links, and these are actually the new links. These do not require a customer source logon. These are public links, so that's great. Microsoft's been moving more and more of their KnowledgeBase articles sort of outside of the firewall, so they're accessible via just general links without special logons. So we can send you these out. Any other questions about 1099s, year-end closes, module closes, or is it all perfectly clear now? I don't hear anything, so if someone's asking, you're on mute. Well, thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Devin.
No problem.